Times were tough, so I sold my soul. And I don't think I'll ever regain control. Devil looked me in the eye and I looked the other way. What else could I do? I just stared at the doorway and knew I'd rather be drunk with you. I'd rather be drunk.
Hey Internet, Dracofunk here, and we are back with my Reusable space program. Today, we are going to send the Interplanetary Tug from Duna back to Kerbin, and I want to apologize the lack of the game audio. I thought I'd be fancy and do the live recording all at once for reasons I will explain during this episode. But I messed up and got the levels wrong, and now I can't go back and undo it in an easy or quick way. So we're just going to do a voiceover, and I'll just have to mute the in-game audio for the time being. This is Season 2, Episode 5 of the series, and I had planned on actually sending the mining ship with a station core to Duna this week. And before I can do that, there's a lot of prep work that has to happen where it needed to be refueled. It was probably going to have to do its own mining run. So I flew it to Columbia Station in orbit of the moon in preparation for that. Also, I wanted to take the station core and send it back to the moon also, so we can just take off to Duna there. But that's taken a lot of effort because I'm going to have to... Well, let me just go back. What I've done so far is the mining craft has rendezvoused with Columbia Station and is waiting to land on the moon. The tanker has taken a load of fuel from Columbia Station back to Kerbin orbit to Enterprise Station. By the way, I'm gonna do some time warp in the game right now on the current mission just to get back to that maneuver node. But anyway, so the tanker, the Canterbury, is at Enterprise Station. I sent the Ares craft out to pick up the station core and bring it back, and it is now docked on the back of the Canterbury, and that is the state of things right now. And there was no way I was going to get all those little snippets put together in a way that made sense to make a full episode, when in reality they don't really come to any conclusion other than we're still just getting ready to do something. So I figured I would record this episode live and do just a live commentary. No quick saves, just whatever happens, happens, which normally is what I do. The only exception to that is if there's a game glitch like we had earlier where the alarm clock sphere of influence was changing during time warp. And you'll see during this episode, I didn't have that issue. I've only had that issue once, but now I'm paranoid about it, so I'll actually set up a manual alarm clock for my sphere of influence changes. But so I had to ditch all my commentary I made, and I got to rethink about things I talk about. I could unmute this and kind of listen to what I said, but that is very distracting, listening to yourself and trying to talk about things so I remember what I said, which I'm probably going to do wrong. Also, that whole last episode, I said this was episode 4, during that commentary when this is in fact episode 5, which I may go back and redo the slide. But anyway, we are now at the maneuver node. We have a 2-minute burn. Actually, we're not there. I think I set a manual maneuver or a manual alarm clock, and I set it for about 45 minutes ahead of time, just in case. But I'll do one more quick time warp to get us within a few minutes of the burn start. And there we are. Now, I did make a mistake here, which I normally don't do, and I didn't do it on this last episode. I was just tired. I'd just gotten my first cup of coffee while I was recording this episode, and I probably should have been paying attention, and I'll tell you what I did or actually didn't do. So we're coming up, we got 20 seconds for this burn. So we are just a few weeks out from Kerbal Space Program 2. And I'm sure I will release some videos on that as soon as it is available. There's the burn starting. But I would like to continue this series in Kerbal Space Program 1, at least for the time being. I kind of want to... I would really, really like to finish the whole colonization process of the Kerbal system. And I'm really not sure what the state of Kerbal Space Program 2 will be in the beginning, or how gameplay will work, or how much of the in-game features will be there with this first release. I know there are some things that aren't yet going to be there, but we'll see. So I'm just, rounding out the burn time, trying to get everything down to... I just want to get it down to 0, and I'm sure this will give us a nice Kerbin encounter. I should be watching and looking at the map. I don't think I really did that until right now. So we'll get a nice Kerbin encounter. We already have an encounter. And this is where I make a mistake. Well, it's actually not here. I finished the burnout just like I should. Now, it's at this point where I really should be looking at my Kerbin periapsis. And I don't. Because right now, adjusting the periapsis is very, very cheap. I'd probably just do it with the RCS thrusters and get it down, because I want to get into about a 500 kilometer orbit and just park it there at Kerbin. And I'll set up right now I'm setting up an alarm clock for the sphere of influence change, and this is where I leave the Duna sphere of influence, and I'll actually be in orbit of the Kerbin sun until I fly into the Kerbin system. So there we're leaving Duna. There's Ike. The only spacecraft now that are left in the Duna system are the 4 relay satellites, at least for the time being. So I do plan on starting our permanent occupation of the Duna system next. I shouldn't say occupation. What's a better word? Our permanent presence in the Duna system. And you can see the relay satellites connected to the Tug, also getting a strong signal from the Kerbin system. What I think I have, there are 11 relay satellites in the orbit of, in the Kerbin system, and 4 in the Duna system. And the Tug itself also has a relay satellite dish attached to it, just to make sure that wherever it goes, it has a strong signal connection, as this craft is unmanned. Now, I set up an alarm clock for the sphere of influence change for when we encounter Kerbin, and I also did a manual clock, and that's because I had that glitch where the sphere of influence change from in the alarm clock, when I would time warp, would change, and that caused me to miss my Duna encounter. Or at the very least, when I exited time warp, I only had a few seconds left inside the Duna system. And I think it took me 3 tries before I figured out what was going on. So I would suggest, if you have an interplanetary approach, you have your sphere of influence change set, just set up in a manual alarm clock, and that'll make sure that you stop in time. Because I was still actually encountering the Duna system, but for some reason, I really don't know. If you want to see what happened, go ahead and watch the first video in season 2, and you can see where I was having that issue. And we are just time warping all the way back to Kerbin. Now, I really wish I had looked at my periapsis, because I could have saved myself a whole bunch of Delta V. Because here I'm getting my Kerbin encounter. I think that my manual alarm clock is actually a minute ahead of the regular one, so I'm about 2 minutes out from the Kerbin encounter. And this is about the time when I realized I hadn't adjusted my periapsis down. It's still going to be okay, because this craft has a lot of Delta V, but I could have done better. Because right about here is where I notice my periapsis is outside of the Minmus's orbit. So I'm just on the edge of Kerbin's sphere of influence. You can see the comm network from the 2 moons. Now I'm just setting up a maneuver node to bring my periapsis down to around 500 kilometers. and it's going to cost me 1,000 delta V. But the good news is I have delta V, and the orbit I will be in is counterclockwise, which is the preferred orbit. Clockwise is considered a retrograde orbit. I'm in a pretty good plane. So all I really have to do is lower the periapsis, and then once I get down to the periapsis, I'll just have to lower the apoapsis. So this is going to be like a 3-minute burn. So this burn's going to, this is basically twice as long as the burn to get back to Kerbin. And this is the part of orbital mechanics that confuses people. Like, you would think it would take more fuel to fly from Duna to Kerbin than to just stay in Kerbin, but that's not the way things work. It's relative velocities and fuel usage, because it's not like a car where you have to keep using gas to keep moving. In space, once you're moving, and you're not going to slow down or speed up unless you expend fuel. So once you have the velocity to head in that direction that you want, it doesn't cost any extra fuel. So what you have, instead of how much fuel you have delta V, which is how much acceleration you have. So at this moment, I have 2,000 meters per second of acceleration, or had, since I'm currently using that to slow down my orbit so I do not fly out of the Kerbin system. And if you watch the end of that blue track, because that's where my orbit's going to take me, it's slowly curving towards the planet Kerbin, and eventually, once it's in a circle, that means I'm not going to leave the system. I'm just going to keep orbiting it. Although I'm in a way, way far orbit right now. I think, yeah, the low point of my orbit is 65,000 kilometers, which is outside of the second moon of Kerbin, Minmus. And I need to decelerate 400 more kilometers to get me down, to get me in an orbit that will take me within 500 kilometers of Kerbin's surface. And here, almost. Still using full acceleration. Okay, now I have a complete circle, which means I'm not going to... My current orbit won't leave the Kerbin system. I'm no longer on an escape trajectory. And I'm just bringing my periapsis down. And the further I bring it down, the more oblong my orbit's going to look. And you can look up in the top left corner, you can actually see my periapsis. That's the lowest point of my orbit. And I want to get it to around 500 kilometers. I overshoot just a little bit, but right now it's really cheap. Since I'm at the top of my orbit, what was the low point is now the high point. I can just use reaction thrusters to get it to right around, 501. That's close enough. So what I'm going to do now is set up an alarm clock. I'm trying to set up a maneuver first, and then I'll put an alarm clock there. But I'm having a weird thing where the maneuver editor keeps showing up, and I'm not sure why. And I think it's because I still have an active maneuver at apoapsis. So once I get rid of that, and I try to set up another maneuver, the interface pops up. And there I can just pull on that section, and that lowers my apoapsis. And I want to get it, close. Because I'm using the nuclear engines, it's not going to go 100%, but I'm not looking really to be super accurate right now. I just want to get it about a 500 kilometer orbit. And I'm just going to, the goal is just to get this parked there. I am going to have to land the probe apparatus that's on the back of this. The whole point of this program is that everything is reusable. So it either goes, once it launches into space, it stays there, or it lands and can be repurposed. Like all the boosters. I still have a booster that's kind of been sitting there for a while that I need to land. I kind of forgot about it. But the apparatus holds 4 probes. It's been used 3 times to launch the probes for the Moon, Minmus, and now Duna. And I will land it again so it can be used for its purpose. And I'm coming up on periapsis where I have a 2-minute burn. It's going to cost 700 delta V. I have 1,287. So I have plenty, and that's going to put me in basically a 500 kilometer parking orbit. But here we are. We have made it back to Kerbin. We're in orbit. I'm circularizing the parking orbit, and this craft has fulfilled its mission, its first mission. I'm going to probably use it to do another mission to Duna. It will probably be tasked with carrying the station truss. And I'll probably also launch 2 of the small Pug units because I want one for Ike and I want one for the Duna station. And I can just put both of those on the front of the Tug on the 2 front docking ports, which are closed right now. They're the shielded docking ports. And the station truss can be on the rear. I will have to refuel this, which will probably it's probably going to take a couple special fueling missions. And actually, probably what I'm going to do is launch a special fuel tank and attach it to the front of the tanker. Because this just uses liquid fuel, does not use oxidizer, since the nuclear engines don't need the oxidizer. I'm kind of having an overabundance of oxidizer at all my stations, except for Minmus, where I don't actually have a mining ship because it fell apart. I should probably remedy that. So there we are. We're in a pretty good parking orbit. You can see that extra booster that's kind of hanging out in that a little bit of an not elliptical, oblong orbit. But there we are. The interplanetary probe has made it back to Kerbin. And next week we will continue our process of colonizing the Duna system and getting the infrastructure set up there like we have for the Kerbin system. Good night, everybody.